Assalamualaikum Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. I'm Nur Syafita binti Abu Samai.
My name is Muhammad Zai Irfan bin Zaini.
My name is Ahmad Rasdan Amir bin Zahimi.
My name is Amira Zulaika binti Arifin.
My name is Lali Shakira binti Mama Azmi and we are from Group 8B. Today, we are going to present the analysis of materials characterization using the XRD, SEM and DSC method. In this experiment, we are using iron oxide powder. Next slide. The first method is X-ray diffraction. Next. X-ray powder diffraction, also known as XRD, is a speedy analytical technique that can offer information on unit cell dimensions and is mostly used for phase identification of crystalline materials. The substance being analyzed has to be finely pulverized, homogenized, and the bulk composition will be estimated on an average basis. The most common use of XRD method is the identification of unknown crystalline materials. Next.
Next, we will talk about the fundamental principle of XRD. A sample is placed into the center of instrument and illuminated with a beam of X-ray. The X-ray tube and detector move in synchronized motion and the signal from the sample is recorded and graphed. The peaks are observed related to the atomic structure of the sample. Next. Interference occurs when X-rays interact with each other. If waves are in alignment, the signal is amplified. So this is called constructive interference. If waves are out of the alignment, the signal destroyed. This is called destructive interference. When X-ray encounter an atom, its energy is absorbed by the electron. The electron occupies special energy state around an atom. Since this is not enough energy for the electron to be released, the energy must re-emit in the form of a new X-ray, by the same energy as the original. This process is called elastic scattering.
For result, SRD is a technique to identify and characterize the atomic structure of material based on their diffraction patterns. This technique is primarily used for crystalline material. Diffraction occurs when an incident beam of X-ray interact with target material, scattering the X-ray from the atoms. Next. Next. The X-ray diffraction pattern obtained can tell what is in the sample structure, and the atoms arrangement of the sample. The source of radiation must be chosen properly to avoid misinterpretation. Next. So for the conclusion, we have successfully obtained the crystalline structure of the metal powder given. We have also identified the phase composition of the metal powder by using the XRD method. The maximum angles of the peak formed at 21.75 degree according to the graph obtained. The crystallization of the phases, which may be related to the curves H or any of the previously described variables affecting changes on the geopolymers, determines the intensity of the peak.
Okay, next we will talk about scanning electron microscope method. Next slide. SEM, which is scanning electron microscope, basically generate a variety of signal at the surface of solid specimen. This was done by using a focused beam of high energy electron. The signals generated by electron sample interaction which provide information on the sample exterior morphology, which is texture, chemical composition, crystalline structure, orientation of the material that make up the sample. In most cases, data is collected across a specific area of the sample surface and a two-dimensional picture is created to show the variety in the characterization.
This is basic working principle of SEM. Basically, SEM is instrument that produce large magnified image by using electron instead of light to form an image. A beam of electron is produced at the top of the microscope by an electron guide. The electron beam follows a vertical path through the microscope which is held within a vacuum. The beam travels through electromagnetic field and lenses which focus the beam down toward the sample. The beam passes through a pair of scanning core or a pair of deflector plates in the electron column that deflect the beam in X and Y axis. Once the beam hits the sample electron and X-rays are ejected from the sample, detector collect this X-ray, backscatter electron and secondary electron, then convert them into a signal that is sent to a screen similar to a TV screen. Next. This process produces final image of SEM. For example, the first figure is colored SEM of cold bacteria and the second one is scanning electron microscope of plant stem. Next.
Okay, so for result and discussion of SEM method, this figure shows the result of SEM analysis for iron oxide powder at 100 and 500 magnification. The particles appear to be spherical, which is good for flowability during layer deposition onto the powder bed. Some particles are conglomerated, which is typical for gas atomized powder. Thus, from the micrograph, the size distribution match the ordered distribution. To understand the structure, which the geopolymer behavior implies in more detail, the sample were analyzed by SEM method. In this experiment, we only focus on the surface of the sample. The SEM analysis is done up until the surface and it is not further continued to the EBSD. Figures shows that there are some properties that we can identify, such as the presence of visible pores and uneven surface. The production of pores in the alloy is mostly due to the formation of surface layer during with the emission of gases such as hydrogen, whereas the external morphology is what reveals the uneven surface, which can be considered as texture on the surface of the sample. Next slide.
Using SEM, we were able to observe the microstructure of the metal powder. The SEM analysis is only done up to the surface of the material in this experiment. SEM is a key tool to study the effect of physico-chemical properties on addition, phenomena such as pH, roughness, topography, temperature, and others. SEM plays also a paramount role for assessing the microbial populations, three-dimensional structure, physiology, thickness, etc. Next. The last method is differential scanning calorimetry. Next. DSC is a thermal analysis technique in which the heat flow into or out of a sample is determined as a function of temperature, or time while the sample is exposed to a controlled temperature regimen. Glass transition temperature, melting, crystallization, Specific heat capacity, cure process, purity, oxidation behavior, and thermal stability are just a few of the material parameters that may be evaluated with this technique. Next.
Basic principle of differential staining calorimetry. When the sample undergoes a physical transformation such as phase transitions, more or less heat will need to flow to it than the reference to maintain both at the same temperature. Whether less or more heat must flow to the sample depends on whether the process is exothermic or endothermic. For example, a solid sample melts to a liquid. It will require more heat flowing to the sample to increase its temperature at the same rate as the reference. This is due to the absorption of heat by the sample as it undergoes the endothermic phase transition from solid to liquid. This is the graph of differential strain calorimetry, which is the heat flow versus temperature or time. Here we can see heat flows out of the sample resulting of heating or exo process with crystallization, chemical reaction, and degradation. And we can also see heat flows into the sample resulting of heating or endo process with glass transition and melting vaporization. Factors affecting the SC curve. First, we have instrumental factors. This includes parameters such as furnace heating rate, furnace atmosphere, recording speed, geometry of sample holders, location of sensors, sensitivity of the recording system, and material of the sample container. Second, sample characteristic. Parameters including type and weight of sample, particle size, solubility of involved gases in the sample, heat of reaction, and thermal conductivity.
Okay, this is result obtained for DSC. Changes in phase transition are tracked using the calorimetry approach. Many of these thermal analysis study does not examine the effect of sample preparation on the result, and the ease of sample preparation using a range of processes is considered as a benefit of the methodology. Based on the graph shown in the slide, at the commencement of the thermal investigation, there is a significant endothermic baseline shift as the heating rate increases from zero to the desired heating rate in the first part of the experiment, resulting differential scanning calorimetry in scanning mode. At 45.41 degrees Celsius, a strong peak appears, indicating the sample melting point owing to an endothermic heat reaction, and its heat capacity at this temperature is zero. An endothermic process also causes a significant negative baseline changes from 30.38 to 300 degrees Celsius. Thermal imbalance between the sample and the calorimeters reference create baseline drift, which causes minor changes in baseline position over the course of an experiment. As the temperature rises above the research material critical point, baseline drift stop at 298 degrees Celsius. Next slide.
Using differential scanning calorimetry, we were able to determine the thermal characteristic of metal powder. It can be observed from the thermogram that the IC was used to analyze thermal properties. The IC is particularly valuable because it provides information on the material's thermal properties. This technique usually provides additional information about the sample being tested, which can help interpret the result of a thermal analysis experiment. Thank you. That's all from us.